Welcome to Conveyancing Matters. On this chat, we will be talking to Noel Hunter, the chairman of the Consumer Code for Homebuilders. Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property. So welcome to this Conveyancing Matters chat. Welcome, returning Noel. So lovely to see you again, Noel Hunter, the chairman of the Consumer Code for Homebuilders. So Noel, never a dull moment in the new build world. How are you?
I'm fine, Lorraine. Good to see you again too.
Yes, likewise. Thanks for coming on. And we should just mention Stu's absence. He's actually got hooked up with other things. So we've decided to plough on with our chat, Noel. Just me flying solo on behalf of Conveyancing Matters today, because there's a lot going on, isn't there? There's a lot going on in the new build industry, Noel.
Well, I described it as a cauldron of issues that are there. I mean, I can't summarise them all, but I mean, we know that government housing targets have not been met. We know the supply chain problems. We know the skill shortages in the industry. There's a lot of issues around planning. There's a whole range of issues around the way in which the industry is configured. I think construction products, for example, have been heavily in the news, and we're seeing a new regime setting up for looking at consumer products going forward. But there's been 25 years when that's not been done, so there's a lot of work to do in that area. And all of that, of course, has fed into a major review by the CMA, which is underway at the moment. That's the Competition and Markets Authority, who were commissioned by Michael Gove to do a study of the entire industry. And that's a big ask. So the timescale of that, I think the interim report might well be out in the summer, but clearly it won't be till nearer the end of this year that we see the more detailed report.
No, I mean, just, well, as you say, cauldron of issues sort of is a great way of putting it in terms of the sort of, the challenges faced by well, of course, new build consumers, which is your focus, of course, and I guess the legal the legal firms that advise them, which I guess is mine. And it's interesting because one of the courses that I run, that's consistently run for 20 odd years, and people always sort of crawl out the woodwork and ask me, Lorraine, can you do this course for us, is on new builds. And I just think for property lawyers at the coalface, it's just just a huge challenge, really, unless you're really streamlined and deal with it all the time, to deal with new build matters. And of course, all of those issues, all of that cauldron of issues, Noel, you talked about, clearly feeds into the experience of the consumer or the client for us when they're purchasing a new build property. But just kind of to slightly sidestep before we talk about the review of the code, which you've come on to tell us about. But the CMA review, Noel, I mean, I think that's interesting from property lawyers' perspective. What's the purpose and scope of the review? What's the remit in terms of the CMA review of new build? What are they actually doing?
Well, they are looking at the industry in the round. So they are looking at the way in which the industry operates. Mm-hmm. And that also includes the consumer impact to the industry. Yeah. We've had meetings with them already, and I'm sure many other people have as well, to explain what we're doing in our sector to try and protect consumers. So it's a very broadly based review, and one which will take some considerable time to complete.
And what, I mean, the outcome of that review, Noel, I mean, at the end of the day, we tend to find it, again, at the sort of property coalface, at the property lawyer coalface, that really recommendations are all very well, but I think unless government legislates, everybody, and dare I say it, I hate to say it, but a lot of the big developers might just sort of carry on as they were, really. And certainly one of the massive bugbears for, I think, property lawyers and their clients is clearly the ridiculous 28-day exchange deadline pressure, and that's what I think actually one of the really root cause problems of dealing with new build transactions, Noel. And really, as I say, if the government unless the government legislates, there's a distinct possibility that that review might just feel like a bit of a kicking it all into the long grass exercise. Or am I being a bit cynical?
Well, I mean, it's early days to make that prediction, but I mean, one hopes that something will come out of this, because clearly it's a review which is taking a lot of resources and has the focus of the CMA, and the CMA, of course, an organisation with quite a degree of clout.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the issues that underlies all this, which concerns me in particular, is, and certainly our reviewer who did the review for us, is the vulnerability of the consumer in all this.
Yeah.
The consumer doesn't purchase many houses in the course of a lifetime, so doesn't have a lot of experience, and therefore, when they come to purchase, they need as much help as they can get, and they are incredibly vulnerable at that point. So this is why we need some clarity in how consumers will be protected in the longer term. And one of the things that our code seeks to do is to try and reinforce the consumer protection that exists in the purchase of a new home. Of course, there are many other homes out there, you know, second-hand homes as well, which need to be carefully controlled too. But we are dealing with new homes, and the review is seeking to try and reinforce the position we've been enforcing for the last 12 years now. And I think we've made a step forward in this review, which will help us considerably in moving the consumer agenda forward.
So what would you say, Noel, and we may have touched on this last time we spoke, to be fair, but what would you say are the biggest real rather than perceived problems that consumers, I always call them clients from my side of the fence, but what are the biggest, as I say, sort of real problems that you and that you and your colleagues and the framework within the consumer code for home builders will deal with? What, as I say, what are the major problems that new home buyers experience?
Well, it's sometimes about the misdescription of the property. What they begin to expect, they may be buying off a plan initially, and when the house gets built, it doesn't look as they expected. It isn't configured quite in the same way. Yeah. There are rules within the code which require, if there are changes in materials, which can sometimes happen because of those supply chain problems I mentioned before. If there are changes in materials, the consumer has to be notified about that. So the code regulates that. Other things are like, for example, you might put a deposit down on the property, and ultimately, because the property can't be delivered in the timescale you want to pull out of that deal. Where you can do that, but will you get all your reservation fee back? Those are the sort of things we deal with as well. And if there is any retention on the reservation fee, for example, that should be made clear to the consumer at the point of supply. So there are quite a number of issues of that kind that we deal with, and we're also looking at the moment at the snagging issues.
Yes.
That the new the revision of the code will cover that, and we will pick up issues that are beyond dispute by between the builder and the consumer. So those are new issues that we're picking up. I should say that one of the other things that the consumer needs is help. And what we've done over the number of years the code has been running is to produce a very comprehensive website. And not all consumers IT literate, so we want to make sure that everybody can get access to the route to complain. So we have now put in place a contact centre as well, and that contact is run on our behalf by the Chartered Trading Standards Institute.
Oh, okay.
So, and it's an internationally based, award-winning contact centre. It's performing extremely well, and it's being well used by consumers. So we've got that in place. We also want to make sure that when a consumer has a complaint, that it's dealt with efficiently, effectively, and independently. And we have an internationally a dispute resolution service with an international reputation, which is handling those consumer complaints. So we're dealing with thousands of consumer complaints every year.
Yeah, you see, that's interesting. And what I'm thinking about when you're talking there, Noel, is actually, frankly, sometimes that the reality of those issues on the lawyer's side of the fence when dealing with a new build is some considerable distance from where the code contemplates that actually consumers buying new homes should be, because all lawyers see, you will of course fully be aware, poorly drafted developer contracts, some developer contracts that still don't have a long stop date in them. So if if completion hasn't happened by date X, both parties can withdraw and the buyer get their deposit back. You know, contracts that give contractually give the developer, you know, the absolute right to change the materials if they want to, and so on and so forth. And you know, all of the issues, as you're quite fully aware, around the snagging issues and the fact that, you know, any problems with snagging can't enable the buyer to refuse to complete, and so on and so forth. And to my mind, there just seems to be still in practice quite a mismatch from what goes on in terms of the contract coming from the developer's solicitor, and quite often what the developer is signing up to become a part of the, you know, you know, to have their name underneath the code, if you like, or the code on their website.
Well, all of those issues you refer to, Lorraine, are covered by the code. So, I mean, this is where conveyancers may find the code extremely helpful to them, because what the code requires is that when the sale is about to take place, when there's exchange of contracts, when there's an agreed contract with the builder, the copy of the code will go directly to the lawyer conveyancer operating on behalf of the consumer, so that they can see very clearly what the code protects the consumer from, and they can use that. That may be in addition to their armory in terms of helping their client to get to a satisfactory conclusion on the sale.
But if we are, I mean, just to be devil's advocate here, Noel, but I'm sure people watching this will be thinking this, you know, we obviously, on behalf of our buyer clients, you know, are batting away. And I have to say, of course, you know, not all developers are in this basket. And there are some, you know, extremely good developers, solicitors firms who put, you know, cracking contract packs together, and you know, so certainly not everybody is in this bracket, but there are a significant number who, for example, if I go back and say, well, you know, these are the amendments I want to the contract, for example, maybe to more accurately reflect the code and protect my client, they will simply say, well, we're not accepting any revisions to the contract. Or they make it very, very difficult. And then they start sort of pushing again and saying, you know, well, your 28-day exchange deadline, you know, you know, if you don't meet the 28 days, you know, we reserve the right to remarket the property elsewhere, and so on and so forth. So I think, to be fair to conveyancers, a lot of conveyancers would still feel very, very hard pressed. And I suppose my question, Noel, long-winded though it is, you know, how would conveyancers use the code in that sort of situation that I describe?
Well, I think the conveyancer can refer back to the code, and the code, if it's a dispute which is between the consumer and the seller, then and as handled by the conveyancer, then the independent dispute resolution service will take it up. So there is help there available, and certainly we're happy to advise on any issues that arise in those circumstances.
I think the thing is, though, that often though it's not a dispute at the point at which it's, you know, we're teetering on the brink of exchange and the buyer wants to exchange on the, you know, the house of their dreams, in, you know, as they see it, at that point it's not a dispute. It's just very, very considerable pressure from the developer, their, you know, the site office, and intransigence on the part of their solicitor. That's what we come across. So at that point, it's not a dispute. It might be a dispute in 6 months' time when they move in, and as you say, they haven't got what they thought they'd got, but that's a different question, if you like. Our issue is to try to get that contract at least partially favouring our buyer client to some extent, and that can be very, very challenging.
Well, if there's a divergence from the original specification of the home, which may be one of the issues, for example, that not only is affected by the code, but also by the consumer regulations as well, and that may well be a criminal issue. So trading standards have an interest in that too. So there are other avenues of support available for conveyancers who are feeling the pressure, where they think that maybe the home which is originally described is not being delivered in the way they see it in the contract. So unfair contract terms regulations are there and can be used too.
Yeah, would it be a good idea, do you think, Noel, for and I'm sure, to be fair, many do, but you know, solicitors, licensed conveyancers, law firms that do any new build work, sort of in their sort of initial introductory sort of communication with their client, be it, you know, letter, email, whatever, to actually sort of point them to the code, remind them what the code is about, send them a link to the code, send the buyer, this information sort of again, really, because people just get completely overawed when they're in that converted garage on a Saturday afternoon and they're having the house of the dream sold to them. I can't think of any other scenario now where somebody would walk into a converted garage and do a backs transfer that day for a few grand to secure a property. I just find it odd, and I've told clients over the years, no, don't do that, that's a very bad idea, and they sort of come in sheepishly on Monday morning and say, oh God, Lorraine, guess what we did? Oh really? It's still a hole in the ground, still a field, I drive past it every day. But as I say, there will be a general awareness when the buyer is signing the reservation form, but that's the point at which the relationship tips, and suddenly the buyer and their conveyancer are under loads of pressure. So is it a good idea for conveyancers to be sort of pointing their clients to the code and reminding them what it's about, sending them the links, and really trying to inform the client up front?
Well, I think it is. And I think it's also important that the conveyancer, the lawyer involved, also makes the seller aware that they are very much aware of the consumer code and the consumer regulations that sit behind all this as well, because I think that puts the seller on their mettle and will make them think twice about any sharp practice that they might be considering.
I hope so. And actually, well, Noel, you mentioned the code's website and training materials, and I know that we mentioned this last time we spoke, but I was really impressed with the amount of content on there. And so do you just want to remind conveyancers what's on the website, that resources that conveyancers can use to familiarize themselves with the code?
Well, if you go to our website, which is under Consumer Code for Home Builders, just Google it, it'll be there. And the website contains sectors which would deal with individual interests. So there is a sector there for lawyers and conveyancers. So if you go into that, there is all of the information about the code, what it covers, what it requires of the seller, what support it gives to the buyer, and there's a lot of information on that site which can help you directly, and it's actually tailored for your needs and your interests. And of course, you can always come and ask questions if you need to.
Oh, that's really useful to know, Noel. Well, I don't think we can, as people in the property sphere, Noel, I don't think we can have a chat these days without sort of mentioning in passing the dreaded Building Safety Act and its sort of terrible tentacles that appear to have pretty much seized up leasehold conveyancing in many areas at the moment. But what's your where do you and the code sit vis-a-vis the Building Safety Act more generally, Noel? This isn't a chat about the act, but I don't think we can ignore it, really.
No, well, I mean, the Building Safety Act is important to the code as well, because it actually envisaged there would be a statutory code and a statutory ombudsman, and that has not happened as yet. So, and is unlikely to happen in the very near future because of all the other pressures on government time. But we certainly thought that by now there would be a statutory code and a statutory ombudsman. This is why we're still talking, Lorraine. Our code is still operating, and will continue to do so. We're still servicing a very high proportion of the industry, and have a backstop on some of the organisations that have transferred to the New Homes Quality Board. That, incidentally, is not a statutory code. Is not a mandatory arrangement, as has been suggested elsewhere. It is just another code which is operating in the marketplace at the moment. We're waiting to see what the government will do. I think we'll have to wait quite a long time to see what happens in that regard. So we are affected by the Building Safety Act as well. So that's why we're continuing to operate, and we'll still provide the level of service, and a hopefully increased level of service now, following the review to consumers.
Yeah, I mean obviously. Sorry, no, I was just going to say, forgive me for cutting across you there, but when we last spoke, unless I'm misremembering, which was some little time ago now, but I think the general message was that the work of your work and the Consumer Code for Home Builders would sort of, well, be winding down. I think the concept was sort of transitioning really to the new Homes Quality Board and Code, and certainly when we last spoke, that's kind of where we were. So do you want to just expand a little bit, because I do think it's quite, well, frankly, it's confusing, because I think a lot of people would have thought, you know, the new Homes Quality Board, you know, was the you know, as you say, the statutory organ that the Building Safety Act envisages. So are you saying that actually there's potentially another you know, code of practice that might be spawned as a result of the act, in which case is that going to create even more confusion in the new build market?
Well, your guess is as good as mine on
yeah,
that
well,
one.
I'm doing training on the Building Safety Act a lot at the moment, Noel, and I'm afraid that's my answer to a lot of solicitors. They're saying, well, what about this, Lorraine? I'm saying, well, I just have no idea.
There was a suggestion originally that the new Homes Quality Board might be the code that was envisaged by the Act, but in fact that's not happened. So it operates just as any other code would, and just as our code does. It's out there and it's doing the business, but there are quite a number of other codes, as you will know, that operate in this field as well, and it depends which warranty body you're with as to which code you might get involved with. So the realistic situation at the moment is, until the government decides on that on a new code and or a new statutory code and a new ombudsman, nothing will happen. When the government decide, then it's perfectly possible that any of the existing codes could put themselves forward as a statutory code and be appointed as a statutory code, including our code. In terms of the ombudsman, that will have to be an appointment that's suitably made, and I guess there will have to be competition in that, because obviously there's a requirement in government legislation to have open competition for these things. So we'll have to see what happens, but I think it's quite a long way off at the moment. So for the time being, at least, we are operating as a single code. One of the things that we saw as very important in our code, bearing in mind that we were very much involved in writing the new Homes Quality Board code, is to get an alignment of codes. So our code now looks very similar to the new Homes Quality Board code, and it's been updated, in other words, to cover some of the new ground that we'd envisaged when we were talking about that code. So it is the alignment of codes is very important to us. What we want to make sure is that it is seamless for consumers. That if a consumer has a problem, they don't have to worry which code they're under. They can simply go to a website or to our contact centre and be directed. So if they go to our contact centre and it's not our code they need to refer to, we will refer them on to the appropriate code and make sure they get the help they require. Well, so that it's seamless from a consumer's point of view. Yeah. So and that's important.
Was it envisaged, Noel, that essentially the consumer code for home builders would sort of transition over to the new Homes Quality Board eventually, and that's now not happening, or did I get that wrong?
Well, that was an original proposal that was made, and we thought that might be something the government might pick up, but the government have not picked that up, and that's certainly not been government policy. There have been statements made in the press that the NHQB is a statutory organisation, but it is not, and so it has not been adopted by the government, and therefore continues to operate as any other code does. It's not as yet accredited by the Chartered Trading Standards Institute. I think it's seeking accreditation, but it's not yet accredited. Our code, of course, is fully accredited, and sure. And what we've sought to do is to make sure that our code is aligned with government policy. So, for example, we are accredited by the Chartered Trading Standards Institute on behalf of government. We have a dispute resolution scheme, which is part of the ADR scheme operated by government, and the contact centre, of course, is a government-sponsored contact centre. So it's we're very much aligned with what the government want out of the code. We've been seeking to make sure that is the case going forward.
So this is, forgive my utter ignorance, Noel. You'll probably get off this call and think, oh my word, what was I talking to her for? But so really, well, for my benefit, I was going to say for the benefit of the people watching, but for my benefit then, what's the difference then? between the Consumer Code for home builders and the New Homes Quality Board and their /code? In what's the difference in purpose? And if you're essentially now in competition with each other, why did you help write their code?
Well, let's do that last question first, because we thought we were working towards a statutory code.
Yes.
So we helped write it. But as it turns out, the government have not decided to take that up. So we are left with another code which is operating, and our code now. So that's how it came about. How we started to work with them. What is the difference? There isn't much of a difference. We use an independent dispute resolution scheme. They use an ombudsman. The only difference is an ombudsman doesn't have the power to enforce the decisions. Mm-hmm. We do have a power, because if we don't get a decision actually enacted by the builder, we have the power to exclude them from the code. So they would be unable to operate. So it's a very powerful sanction. So we are able to enforce our decisions.
But wouldn't that developer then just, pick up its teddies and go and try and get subscribed with an alternative code?
No, we have an agreement between codes that there should be a protocol that does not happen. Otherwise, you end up with the lowest common denominator.
Well, yeah, it's always the race to the bottom, isn't it? I think it's interesting, Noel, that you say, government have, commented on this, that, and the other, because of course it was only a matter of fleeting weeks ago that, somebody, in government who shall remain nameless said, well, let's abolish leasehold. Oh, actually, no, it's not. It's going to be quite difficult. So now, Noel, I understand why you want to talk to us about the review of the code, because my first question to you was going to be, but we've obviously chatted. Well, if the Consumer Code for home builders was sort of in its twilight months or years, then why on earth did you have a big review carried out by John Bridgman, the former Director General of Fair Trading, no less? And I now completely understand why your 3-year review, as I think it wasn't perhaps initiated at the time, and why you've, I think, probably quite sensibly decided to to sort of actively run with the review and pick up its recommendations, Noel. So what I thought was very incisive, actually, about the review of your code, I thought the whole issue really that all of us face in relation to in the new build sector is actually clause 3.1 of the executive summary of the review. The new homes industry is of major significance to the UK economy, but in an area in which consumer experience is inevitably very low and hence vulnerability high. And that absolutely is bang on in terms of what we as property lawyers would recognise. So Noel, you've had a review. I completely now understand why. So would you perhaps talk me through, what you would say are the main issues to come out of the review that you've accepted, which I know is the vast majority of them. What would you say are perhaps the 2 or 3 most important things from the consumer perspective that have come out of the review?
Well, I think let me just put it into context, because you mentioned the review was delayed, and it was because we were uncertain about government policy. So we delayed it for a couple of years before we did it. But we thought it was really important because you mentioned the issue of problems for consumers. When our code started in 2010, it was on the back of a review by the Office of Fair Trading, which is where John Bridgman, of course, was based, that pointed to some of the problems within the home buying industry, home building industry, and basically said to the industry, put your house in order or we will legislate. So the code was what came out of that situation. And so we've been developing over the last 10 years, 12 years now, to make sure that it meets the needs of consumers. In that time, we've dealt with literally thousands of complaints. And hundreds of complaints now every year go to independent dispute resolution, and it operates entirely independent of the industry. One of the criticisms of our code was that perhaps it wasn't totally independent because our code had less people on the board who were from the industry than were consumers. That is now going to change. We will have more consumers on the board than from the industry, but that didn't actually matter too much, apart from perception, because the Independent Dispute Resolution Service was, as the name describes, totally independent.
Yeah.
Our sanctions regime was totally independent. So it was divorced from the board itself. So what the review has now done is to reinforce the point that we should have more consumers on the board. We will do that. We will also make sure that the codes are aligned. We are very keen to see a close working relationship between all codes, so that the consumer does not fall through the cracks in the middle. And that's really important. And that I've made that point already. We want a single access point so that consumers can get direct access to the code they need to support them, so that it's seamless. We will be looking at compensation levels. We know that our compensation levels are adequate at the moment because we haven't exceeded them, and it's not our decision, it's an independent decision that's taken about what to award, but we're going to increase them anyway to give the compensation levels a higher limit, and that will be kept under review, and the compensation levels will be kept to a level which will make sure that consumers are never disadvantaged. We want to make sure we deal with snagging, which is another key issue, which has not been within the code previously, and that will now come under the code, and some issues that are not resolved between the builder and the consumer will be sorted out. I would just make the point that a lot of issues are sorted out by the builder and don't have to come to independent dispute resolution. There's a lot of stuff is sorted out between the builder and the consumer, satisfactorily and ably. Thousands every year are done that way, and we facilitate that by working closely with the warranty bodies. So that's quite important just to remember. It's not all bad news. A lot of the builders are doing what they should be doing and sorting out matters when they arise. So that's important to us. We're also looking to make sure that shared ownership is covered as well. So that if there's a shared ownership arrangement in relation to a property, then the shared ownership is covered by the code too. So there are quite a number of key issues there which are going to take the code forward, and we will continue to be working very hard on getting the message out to consumers. One of our challenges has always been making sure consumers know about us. Yeah. But we have a very experienced now PR team who work continually on PR for us, looking at social media and so on. So we put a lot of information out there, and that's reflected in the number of complaints we get. We are getting more and more complaints through. That's not just the reflection of things getting worse in the industry, but a reflection of us being more accessible, and that's important going forward. So our dialogue with the industry continues as well apace, and that's again very important to us to make sure we're feeding out to the industry. We do this on a regular basis, feeding out to the industry where problems are occurring at the front line. We send this information directly to the chief executives of companies, and that's welcomed by most chief execs. Well, I'm not come across the one that hasn't welcomed it, because
at least they tell you. That's what they tell you now. They tell you do they say we're grateful to you for your feedback?
Well, they do, but they go one stage further. I like to give credit where credit is due, because we know a lot of chief executives have used this as a tool to make sure their front end is working, because they're concerned too that they have a good reputation with their buyers.
I was going to say reputation is everything, really, isn't it?
It is. Reputation is everything. So they use that as a way of checking on their frontline teams. Yeah. So I can understand.
I think that's a very good thing. So maybe, Noel, to in conclusion, really, maybe at the end of our last chat, I maybe had envisaged you sort of drifting into the sort of twilight of consumer protection for Mr. Hunter, but actually you're now paddling very much in the other direction, I think, now back into the front line, I would say. Well, you've not really left it, but would that be a fair assessment?
Well, what we're continuing to do until government decide what it wants to do in terms of the Consumer Safety Act and the statutory code and statutory ombudsman, we know there are lots of consumers out there that need protection, and it's no good us paddling back, as you put it, but we need to make sure we're giving the best possible service we can to consumers to protect them in what is their most vulnerable purchase they ever make in their lifetimes.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and we're looked at by, our professional bodies, and the SRA did some research a few years ago, not that long ago really, that sort of, highlighted that, some of the pressures that that people, often of course first time buyers buying, new builds, found, they weren't getting the support from their conveyancers that they should be getting. So it's a very, very broad issue that I think affects all of us. But I'm, very, very grateful for you coming on again, Noel, and well, really sort of delighted that such a well-established, well-run code is sort of back in the front line, because it it sounds to me that you'd be there to be picked, I have to say, and I think the sort of moving forward thing is strategically must absolutely be the right thing to do, where consumers are at the heart. So, but certainly when we last spoke, I thought that consumer code for home build was, as I say, rather in its twilight days. But I think you've rushed back into the limelight with it, Noel, and to fill the vacuum.
Could I just, as a final point, say to your listeners after this, your conveyancers, if there's anything else they think would be useful for us to provide in terms of support and advice to them, please let us know. And we're always trying to listen to the client groups, the stakeholder groups that we're dealing with, to make sure that we are servicing their needs, to make sure the consumer is as well protected as they can be. Okay.
Oh, well, that's really, really interesting. And I think, for example, an organisation like yours, Noel, maybe doing maybe even doing some research, for example, on property firms, the range of property firms that might do new build work. I suspect if you'd be quite surprised at some of the stories you get from firms, and some of the sort of practices that we do come across pretty regularly, because our job is really to get our clients sort of safely across the line, and but there can be an enormous amount of stress wrapped up in that transaction. So well, no, but what I'll perhaps ask you to do, if I may, is for you to just let me have maybe an email address or contact details that our conveyancers can contact the relevant people at the code on, so that they can sort of feedback, ask questions, do what they need to do, because that I think would be really, really beneficial, really helpful.
Well, there's a facility on our website to do that. So if they go to the website, if they want to leave some information on the website, they can, and we will pick that up. Okay.
Fantastic. Right. Where would they find that?
Consumer Code for Home Builders. Just Google it, and you'll get Consumer Code for Home Builders. The website's there. On the website, they can find access, and they can leave information on there as well. So.
Oh, fantastic! Excellent. Well, thanks so much for joining me on Conveyancing Matters, Noel. I mean, as ever, a very, very interesting and enlightening chat at what is a very busy time, I would say, for all of us involved in the new build property industry. So thanks for joining me, Noel.
You're very welcome, Lorraine. Good to see you again. Thank you.
Take care. Bye. And you.
Bye.